This is a little bit different podcast today because it's just me and I'm going to be talking about our podcast. We get a lot of questions about how we got it started, and so I'm here to answer your questions. And before I dive in, I'm going to give a shout out to Jessica Butcher. Thanks for listening. And a second shout out to my co-host, Alli, who is recovering from total hip replacement. We're sending you all the best, Alli. Now let's dive in.
Welcome to the Girls Talk Healthy Aging podcast, where we dive deep into pressing health and fitness issues facing aging women. I'm Alli Kerr.
And I'm Shawna Kaminski. And together we'll bring candid conversations, expert advice, and personal stories that will inspire and empower you on your own wellness journey.
All right, well, let's dive in about our podcast because I feel like we have a little bit of a unique story. And I'm going to hold that story off until I give you a little bit of stats on podcasts, because podcasts are really popular. In fact, there are 4.7 million podcasts, but only 1.8 million have survived 1 month and only 1 million after 1 year. The number drops to 700,000 podcasts worldwide after 2 years. And Alli and I are much past that. So let's dive into a little bit about how we got started. So when did it start? We started in 2023, and Alli just reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to do a podcast with her. And she's actually in Macon, Georgia, and I'm in Calgary, Alberta. And many people wonder, well, how did that happen? We happened to join a business mentoring group probably in about 2013. So we've known each other for a good long time, and we always hit it off. And she just wanted a passion project and thought of me, and I was thrilled. So we just started it. We decided that we would podcast once a week, and we thought that would be a doable time frame. And we typically record on Tuesday afternoons. However, we change our recording as needed by our guests. And we always take just about an hour of our guest time. We try and keep our podcasts under an hour so that they are listenable to in one shot for our listeners. And I typically will do the editing on the podcast. So that takes a couple hours afterwards. And then Alli does the show notes, and that probably takes her a couple hours on the other end as well. And lots of people ask, well, how did you know how to podcast? Well, we did not. This was a learning curve for us. Both of us have done some internet marketing, and, we just figured it out. So if two older gals can figure it out, it's a doable project if it's something that is of interest to you to start your own podcast. If you're interested in starting a podcast, it's always good to be a guest on a couple podcasts so you can kind of get the idea of what podcasting would be like. In fact, I had a podcast, probably in around 2018. I did a year of podcasts. I think I only had 12. And I fall into that podcast fell into the category of lasting 1 year. The key to being successful with podcasts is actually just to continue podcasting. Let's get back to a little bit more stats on those podcasts, because I found it quite interesting, is that the average audience size is just about 1,900 listeners, and there are about 100,000 sponsored podcasts, 96,000 to be exact. And about 4.3% of those podcasts will have guests on them. In terms of episode counts, there are 1 million, about 1.5 million podcasts that have 1 to 10 episodes. And our podcast, I think we're closing in on 150 podcasts. And so we are in the company of about 146,000 podcasts. Of those original 4.7 million podcasts worldwide, it really drills down to only like about 150,000 that have been going and, doing between 101 and 200 episodes. So I'm pretty proud of the fact that we're closing in on 150 episodes. Most podcasts actually release episodes weekly, and that's about 261,000 podcasts. And there's only about 97,000 podcasts that release daily. I can't imagine releasing a podcast every day. Now, as far as our little podcast, it's not so little. I'm pretty proud of the fact that we have a 4.9 star rating, overall rating that we've maintained. And feel free to hit the rating buttons on Spotify and Apple. We really appreciate that. We are recognized as one of the 30 best healthy aging podcasts by FeedSpot. So, like I said, I'm pretty proud of the fact that we've come so far, considering that we really didn't know anything about podcasting in the beginning. And the way we started it is we just decided who would do what. And, I just said, hey, I'll do editing. And Alli said, I'll do the show notes. And we didn't draw up any kind of legal agreement or anything in the beginning. We just have a working document of jobs that are what each person would do. We just decided that it would be best to manage expectations, to have a few things written out, but we didn't call on lawyers. We have a working agreement, and we decided just to do the podcast together as long as we were enjoying it and having fun. And so we didn't do anything like fancy about it, but we did draw up a list of jobs because I think that's important to be able to manage who's doing what so that there's not any hard feelings. And we both recruit guests. And some people ask, well, where do you get your guests? Well, initially, when we started our podcast, we just thought it would be cool to talk to each other, which it was. But then we started getting guests, and we just reached out to our own network. And then we reach out a lot on Instagram. And then some of our best guests come from our best guests. So we ask for referrals. And if you know of someone that you think would be a good guest for us, well, we are all ears. We would love to have any ideas and suggestions. And really what our goal for the Girls Talk Healthy Aging podcast is to have people that can, first of all, provide evidence-based information. We're really about trying to sort out the facts from the noise, especially in the health and wellness field, because it really is a minefield. So our goal is to try and, give listeners positive, evidence-based information about wellness, about healthy aging. We want to educate, we want to inspire, and we find that healthy aging spans a number of areas. So we've had doctors and many and scientists and realtors, grief counselors. We've had, I don't want to call them average people because I feel like they're very special, inspirational people, but we don't have like necessarily famous people, but we've had some very popular doctors and scientists on that, have large audiences as well. But, just the Mrs. Joneses of the world, sometimes they have a really inspirational story. So we have, we don't exclude people just because they might not have a big audience or a big following. We are just more interested in a good story. So, so it's been really fun to have these guests on. When we have, sometimes Alli will recruit a guest, or sometimes I'll recruit a guest, and lots of times the way we prepare is, say, if I recruit a guest, I'll get the bio, I'll create questions so that Alli has a good idea of where the interview is going. So we're never scripted. Like this podcast that I'm just basically talking to myself with is not scripted. I just have a few notes of, where I want to go with it. And that's generally how all our podcasts go. We'll have kind of some not scripted questions, but just some talking points. And so if Alli brings a guest on, she'll send me the talking points. So I'll have an idea of who this guest is, and then I might do a bit of research or digging to find out a bit more about that guest. And then we go from there. Many people ask, how do you get paid for this podcast? And guess what? This is a fun fact, is it's really just a passion project for us. We love speaking with each other. We love the process of the podcast. We love meeting guests. And I don't know about Alli, but for me, I consider this kind of my volunteer work of just putting good energy, good information out into the world. And I really want to thank our listeners who are very supportive in terms of, tuning in every week, providing feedback. It really is, we really love it. It is our passion project. So do we get paid? No, we don't. Would we consider sponsorships? Yes, maybe in the future. But both Alli and I have agreed that I think one of the reasons we have worked so seamlessly together is because we are doing this out of passion. And, there are expenses that we share. They're not huge expenses at this point, but because we're not, worried about divvying up profits, it just makes sometimes money muddies the waters. And for us, that just isn't an issue. Would we like it to be a sponsored podcast at some point where we could generate revenue? Well, we're not going to say no to that. But for now, it is strictly a passion project that we love doing, that we commit to. I look forward to seeing Alli every week. And I have honestly missed her while she is recovering from hip replacement. And I have to say that I feel a little bit responsible that she's hanging out with me, and I've had 2 hips replaced and now she needs her hips replaced. I'm pretty sure science would suggest that hip replacement or hip deterioration is not contagious, but it does concern me. And I am wishing her all the best for a fast recovery. I'm sure she's going to be back on the podcast again soon, but I just thought, you know what? We've had so many questions about the podcast that it would be fun just to do a podcast Q&A about the podcast. Now, I want to finish up with some surprising outcomes of the podcast. And aside from having amazing guests, I have so enjoyed some of the amazing guests that we've had. I've learned so much. I've gained new perspective in different areas of life based on the guests that we've had. I find it such a huge opportunity to be able to get to know people in different walks of life and to be able to ask them questions and pick their brain. That has been I guess not a surprising outcome, but I've really enjoyed that. As another surprising outcome was the fact that we did the Peru trip, that we are doing an Iceland trip. So our goal, actually, when Alli approached me to do the podcast, I did say, hey, I want to use this podcast to be able to see you more, because she's in Georgia, I'm in Canada. Our paths don't cross in real life very often. So I said, we're going to find a way to use the podcast to be able to get together. And I would love to be able to do a girls' trip. And because when I ran my boot camp, I used to do women's retreats and I love them. So I had this vision that, maybe somehow the podcast would be able to we would be able to find a way to do some kind of women's retreat. And then lo and behold, we had Julie Rose on the podcast, and she's a nomad. And she just suggested, hey, why don't we partner up and do a girls' trip, a women's sabbatical? And that's how that first trip to Peru was born. And that was a smashing success, especially for, out of the gate, I think we had 26 women on this trip, and it was beyond words. I couldn't have asked for a better experience. The women that joined were just amazing. Everybody got along. Nobody was late for anything. There was a few lost bags, but the women that lost their bags and then had them later returned to them, they were such good sports about it. Everybody helped out everyone. I would say one of the highlights of having this podcast was being able to provide that travel opportunity for some women that have never left their state before. So being able to provide that opportunity, and some of the guests on that trip found us on the podcast. So that was a great and surprising outcome. And of course, we've got Iceland coming up in September of 27 that we only have a couple spaces left on that. So that is a surprising outcome. And I guess I shouldn't be surprised about this last outcome, but that is just the deep and meaningful friendship that Alli and I have forged with working together weekly for going on 3+ years now. I couldn't ask for a better co-host. As we age, I find that female friendships are just so important. And the fact that Alli and I can create this relationship from 2 countries away and connect with, in such a meaningful way, that has been such a great, not surprising, but wonderful outcome from doing this podcast. And if I had a wish for our listeners today, that would be that you would continue to listen to our podcast, provide any feedback that you have for us. And of course, another wish is that my sister in crime, Alli, has a fast recovery and returns to the podcast soon. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. You'll find me, Alli, on Instagram at Alli Kerr Fitness.
And you'll find me, Shawna, on Instagram at Shawna Kaminski. Feel free to pop us a DM with questions and or feedback. If you're enjoying the Girls Talk Healthy Aging podcast, please subscribe and share it with other health-minded women. Ratings and reviews are also much appreciated and help us get our message out to a larger audience.
Until next time, be healthy and be happy.